Good afternoon, everybody. Matt, Lindsay, and gang, can you all hear me still? Are y'all with us?
Yep. Yes.
Oh, good. All right, excellent. So again, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on our webinar this afternoon. Oh, man, I have some, does that sound like it's echoing to you guys?
I'm getting some feedback too.
You are getting feedback? Okay. So I'm gonna redial in. Okay. Just sit tight for 30 seconds. Okay.
Hi, everybody. This is Matt Lindsay with Macroeconomics. Patty Slusher had, oh, there she is.
I'm back. I'm back in. Sorry. It said all circuits were busy. I couldn't get in.
Yeah.
So if you went ahead and got started, Matt, go ahead.
No, we haven't. So please, after you.
Okay. Anyway, once again, I'm Patty Slusher with America's Newspapers. I'm the program director, and I apologize for our technical difficulties. Thank you for joining us on the webinar today. In just a minute, I'm going to introduce Matt Lindsay, who will introduce his team, but just some housekeeping items for you. First off, you obviously will be muted on the call, everyone. Secondly, you will get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that Matt is going to be utilizing today. You will also get a copy, a video recording of today's webinar. And you will also get webinar takeaways, which are a summary done by Mark Fitzgerald here at America's Newspapers of all the important points. It's kind of a one-sheet takeaway of the most salient points from today's webinar. So with that, I am going to turn our program over to Matt Lindsay, the CEO of Mather Economics. Matt's got a team of really smart people with him today, and he's got a whole company of really smart people. He's going to try to help us today get through this crisis that we're in and talk about your digital and print subscriptions. So, Matt.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Patty. This is Matt Lindsay with Macroeconomics. Thank you for joining us today. Looks like we got a great number of people on the webinar, so we're very happy to have the opportunity to talk to all of you today. In addition to myself, I have three of my teammates here at Mather, Arvid Chiefchul, Matthew Lule, and Dustin Tetley. They are all senior directors at Mather and have all worked here for several years. I'm going to let them do most of the talking. Just to give you a quick summary of what we're going to cover, we're going to talk primarily around the audience revenue and what's been happening during the crisis. We're going to cover the volume effects of the increase in traffic on print and digital, and the transition of print to digital customers in some markets. We're also going to talk about kind of the rate effects and different decisions people are making with respect to pricing. All the questions, we'll have questions at the end of the session, so please, if you think of anything you'd like us to cover in more detail, please let us know. You can send those questions through. I think Patty's going to curate those for us. And then we'll also cover at the end some other ancillary topics that you may be, questions you may have. So without further ado, I'm going to let Arvid lead us off. So Arvid, it's all yours.
That was good. So great. So we'll start off a bit on the kind of digital subscription side, and I'll share a little bit just high level of some of the strategic implications of what's happening now. Most of the content I've prepared today is mostly around benchmarks and just some things that we expect to happen. So, to kind of start off, the initial, I think, reaction to all the kind of breaking news and, was initially kind of a sense of journalistic mission. I think that's still critically important. I think what has happened now, just at a broad level, is I think a lot of publishers are finding the right mix of what content or how much content should be held in front of the paywall or free, so to speak, versus what content should be sort of behind the paywall or metered and premium. So I think that's perhaps shifting a bit more towards the, making sure that content is locked down, that is valuable, and perhaps not urgent breaking news that's for the national, national good. So we'll share some more benchmarks around that as we go through here. The other kind of broad implication, obviously, advertising revenue is struggling on the direct sold side. We do see a pretty big bump in page views, obviously, across the board. And I'll share some benchmarks on kind of the growth that we're seeing across the industry. But the one takeaway that we've seen is the growth in programmatic revenue is not one-for-one with the page views. So I think there's, it's not quite there's some diminishing returns I think we're seeing on the advertising side. And that has really a big implication on the intelligent paywall or dynamic paywalls, so to speak, is that historically, the balance, you want to find a balance between risking digital advertising dollars while also maximizing subscription revenue. I think right now that pendulum is swinging very aggressively towards the subscription revenue side. So because this external force of advertising risk has kind of come, there's no longer as much of a risk from taking aggressive action with the paywall. So we're expecting and actually recommending to our clients where we have the data to actually be a bit more restrictive with the paywall, save for the breaking news on COVID. The other thing we think is going to happen perhaps a bit faster now is the print to digital migration. So again, obviously there's pressure on kind of the costs and staffing, maintaining the operation. There's perhaps also some pressure from consumers, although that's been also mixed. But we think that sort of transition from print to digital will probably accelerate over this year, and we're actually expecting a lot of kind of best practices and innovative tactics to come out of that by the end of this year. In terms of more tactical insights, that's where we'll focus the rest of this talk today. So just kind of a quick preview, we'll share some benchmarks. We'll share some examples. It's not quite a perfect one-for-one, but there is some history that we have that perhaps is a somewhat relevant parallel for events like this, where there's natural disasters, or even in kind of an extreme case, an extreme positive case, Super Bowl win. So we'll share an example of what happens to subscriptions, these kind of highly emotional and kind of the moment times. We'll share some impacts on what that means for retention, and just again some things we've learned over the years of how, during these kind of periods, what happens with retention longer term. We'll share some data on content preference, and then basically make some recommendations around how do you kind of manage this long term. So with that, we'll go right into it. On the next page, we have some high-level benchmarks that we've put together. So this is looking at a period, essentially kind of kind of late January, February as kind of the prior 30 days, and kind of mid-February to mid-March as the most recent 30 days. So kind of a 30-day period snapshot before and after really this crisis really gained traction in the US especially. Across the board, we are seeing a growth in subscriptions. I think everyone who's on the call has seen this as well, perhaps to different degrees. On average, again, across about several hundred publishers, about 71 or conversions overall have grown by about 71%. Now, again, there's people who are below that and above that. We think there's some best practices we'll share for what those publishers who are kind of at the top of that benchmark or above that benchmark are doing. At the high end, we're seeing subscription growth of 200, 300%. And again, we think there's some things that those publishers are doing that is driving that. We also see, of course, growth in engagement. So the Fanatics growth there, 27%. That's kind of the most loyal kind of audience. So that's also grown just in volume. And of course, new users as well, and even known users have grown as well. And that's likely driven by all the newsletters and in some cases, registration walls people have put on their websites. So again, massive growth all around. The other thing we've noticed was just in terms of content production, most publishers have increased production kind of period over period. So that means there's, if you were publishing 1,000 articles a month, about 2/3 of publishers now publish more than that per month. So a lot of it is kind of additive COVID content. We do see that 1/3 of publishers have less content overall, and that's perhaps where it's a bit more, resources are constrained, or it's a bit of a different, local environment there, where perhaps the COVID content is replacing some of the traditional kind of things that were written, perhaps even reducing the staff a little bit due to just safety and just logistical concerns. But overall, it's been a growth in content, and in some cases, a bit of a decline. And then lastly, in terms of percentage of content, we look here just of all the articles published in the last 30 days, how many of them had a specific kind of COVID-related subject. And I think this perhaps has grown even in the past maybe week or so, but at least at the time of this data set, about 15% of all articles published were COVID-related. And the plurality of publishers are in that 15 to 20% range, the high end kind of approaching 40% of total content. But again, we think that perhaps could shift over time depending on just the severity and just how long this continues. So that's some benchmarks. On the next page here, we also observe just user behavior. This is coming from our listener data platform tracking system. So we observed, again, hundreds of websites where people engage and read all kinds of articles. In short, we found 3 distinct behaviors on websites. I think, the kind of gut instinct is to say that everyone's reading COVID only because you're seeing the page views increase. But if you actually break down the audience inside of those, on your websites and what they're reading, only about 1/3 of users are kind of COVID only, so to speak. So that's the only content they're reading. About 45% of users are kind of a mix of content, so they're kind of reading everything on the site. But that also leaves the last quarter or so, 23%, who are basically trying to avoid COVID at all costs, and at least the content. So in terms of kind of, COVID promotion, I think it's still important to promote that content. It's still very relevant. It's very of the moment of, what the journalism should cover. But just kind of being aware that there are these different audiences on your sites, perhaps, there's some different tactics you can take. So if you know that 23% of your audience is avoiding it, you can target them with a message that says, hey, tired of all this news, here's something different to read, or here's, for your subscribers if you're seeing people kind of disengaging from overload of information, promote non-COVID content. So again, we can be very precise with this data in terms of the kinds of marketing and tactics you take. So the other thing we've noticed, this is with the growth in new audiences, it's kind of like almost a nice, again, consolation prize, so to speak, where you are seeing a lot of top funnel growth. So we strongly suggest that now is the time to kind of take this new audience segment, identify them using your data, and then be very aggressive with your kind of top and mid funnel touch points. So making sure that you're kind of pushing them down through the funnel with newsletters, registration, calls to action, content promotion, and again, those kind of things. So again, I think now is the time to really kind of think about how do you kind of convert this new audience and this growth audience into long-term readers. That's perhaps the takeaway here. Here, so I mentioned earlier, there's a couple things from history we can learn. This is perhaps not the most, again, a Super Bowl win is obviously not what's happening right now with COVID-19, but the kind of corollary perhaps is it's an emotional kind of time, whether it's good or bad. It's in the moment, and it's hopefully it's somewhat seasonal, so to speak. So at some point, this crisis will end. It may be, no one really knows when. This is kind of the challenge now, but it will end. And after that ends, or if it becomes less of a crisis and more of a kind of a managed situation, at that point we expect a few things. So one is obviously now we're seeing kind of the ramp up in subscriptions. We're seeing a peak, as you're seeing here. There's for an emotional time, there's a kind of a peak after that kind of moment. But right after that happens, and once we kind of get past these sort of headlines, we usually see a huge dip in sales and new starts. And so this index here of kind of dotted line that you're seeing, that's sort of the trend that this publisher was seeing for kind of the couple months prior to November. And you can see that it took them a while to recover, save for a summer flash sale in kind of July, August of this kind of sample here. Only until maybe a year after did it kind of recover or get close to that where they started. So again, I would just anticipate make sure that you're getting your subscriptions now. If you're below that 72% growth in conversions, now is the time to kind of take action and make sure you're getting these subscriptions while they're easy, so to speak, and then prepare for the dip after this kind of starts to abide. So that's kind of the takeaway we have just from these kinds of events. And we've seen these same patterns with, again, natural disasters, the California wildfires, hurricanes, and so on. So this is not kind of, we can learn from this kind of history. And so that's kind of the lesson learned. And in terms of, again, tactics, what we think are kind of the reasons why this is happening and kind of some tactics to take. We think what happens during these times is you're almost amortizing these conversions sooner than you would have based on kind of a normal trend. So whereas you would perhaps take you months or longer to kind of build loyalty, build engagements, and then eventually acquire the user, you're really doing that all at once. So that's, I think, why this sort of phenomenon happens, where you have a huge spike and then a dip. Again, the retention implications, and actually we can probably go to the next slide here. The retention implications are also interesting. So we know that now's the time to take action and get these subscribers with, being a bit more aggressive with the paywall while still doing your journalistic mission. But again, the other takeaway is to make sure that you're ready for when this abides. You have a distinct set of retention touch points for this audience. And again, you can identify them by either saying any starts between February and whenever this ends, you treat them differently. Or if you do know they're kind of the content they're reading, if you remember that pie chart with the 3 kind of behavior groups, if you know which group the person falls into, you can again be very precise about the retention tactics for the audience. But what we expect is that, once this crisis is over, the ones who did convert because of this crisis, they likely will be the first to churn. So therefore, again, we think that now and maybe very, very soon, if not now, start to shift the kind of engagement tactics for this audience, for these new subscribers, away from all COVID all the time to perhaps introducing other aspects of your value proposition. So it's introducing new content, different features like apps I mentioned earlier, newsletters, reinforcing that you're not just covering COVID, you're covering local politics, you're covering business, you're covering all the different ways that you're kind of serving the customer. So we think that is that kind of series of touch points should be starting to be created now, and then being ready to deploy very, very soon, if not now as well. On the next slide, yeah. So we do have an example here where we've observed, again, not quite a corollary to any kind of COVID content or national disaster even, but looking at what content is relevant for conversion versus retention. I think now it's still too early to say if what the impact of COVID-19 is on retention. There are some benchmarks that Matthew and Dustin will share that I think suggest some positive news there, but we don't quite yet know the content impact or the content, what kind of content causes people to retain in this kind of context. But in this example here, we did a study for a publisher where we looked at what content is kind of performing on each side of the funnel. So you can see here that content like business, opinion, arts, high school sports, and a little bit the NFL, very good for conversion, kind of the right side of the chart here. But if you look at retention indexing, high school sports and NFL are actually pretty bad in terms of retention. Again, part of that's due to seasonality, part of it's due to the type of audience that is. But the kind of takeaway here is if someone converts specifically for one kind of content or one type of article, you have to have a retention strategy long-term that shifts their engagement to what does support retention. So again, this is an example of just, again, a very localized example for a publisher, but this is kind of why we believe that, again, shifting the kind of retention touch points to focus on other content, it's because it's of the moment, it's very distinct content, and then long-term, we think there is perhaps some risk. So we want to make sure the retention touch points are ready for when this starts to abate. So on the next page, I mentioned the business rules. So, the first 3 or 4 here are basically, the best practices, breaking news, COVID-19, absolutely should be free to serve the public good. However, if it's an in-depth story, if it's something that's very, if it's unique that you've created, that's not just an AP story or things like that, that should be behind the paywall. Additionally, the free COVID-19 content, we believe that should still count towards the paywall, so to speak. So even if the paywall does not fire or present itself on the breaking news coverage, you should still count that towards the meter. Again, if you have a premium site, it's a non-metered website, then you can still keep that breaking news free, but then everything else should be premium. So again, one takeaway here too is we've had some publishers disable the paywall completely. We don't recommend that. So again, for anything that's not breaking news, it should be behind the paywall. Again, I think many have already started, created their newsletters for this content, so that's fantastic, and I'm sure that's also a great, just again, top of funnel or mid funnel kind of source of audience, and it will be great to over time, again, convert into subscribers. There's some recommendations around communication. I think publishers have actually done pretty well on this front, where they kind of walk that fine line between not sounding exploitative about, asking you to pay, but still trying to get the best of, maintain a business model. So I think that's been very successful from what I've seen. some other things, asking people to donate, support a subscription. That's always a good time to do it as well. Whether it's donating to you directly or to a charity, I think that's just a great way to support the community. I mentioned kind of the acceleration of digital or print to digital. So I think, now especially is the time to reach out to your print subscribers and make sure that they have a digital account, activate them if you can. And if they're not engaged, make sure that you're engaging your print subscribers. So again, I think that's going to be a big focus area for this year. And the last one here, I think we mentioned. So just, now is kind of the time to really think about the tactics you're taking and not to kind of wait until this stops and then look back and say, oh, we should have done all these things. So now's kind of the time to act on the business side. So I think that's the, we can probably skip this one here, but that's kind of the, again, maybe 20-minute summary of what's we're seeing on the digital subscription side.
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and take over here. And so obviously, as Matt and Arvid mentioned, there's just been a ton of disruption in the media industry as a product of this COVID-19 pandemic. Between the four of us, we have dozens of conversations with publishers across the country and around the world. And we talk to them about the impacts that are happening in their businesses right now. The rest of our team obviously has, dozens and dozens more of those conversations weekly as well. So, some of the themes that we're seeing right now, as Arvid mentioned, really a very sharp increase in the demand for news. And that's coming particularly through digital channels. And so that's showing up in terms of, higher digital subscriptions, higher percentage of conversion rates and things like that. But we're also obviously seeing a very significant decline in advertising demand as businesses are shuttering or furloughing employees. We've also heard from publishers a somewhat nuanced impact on single copy sales. It seems like some publishers are actually doing quite well in single copy and have been able to move their draw around to meet demand as some of those businesses are shuttering for the time being. Other publishers are having a tough time on the single copy side with losses in the double digits, sometimes high double digits. And so it's somewhat of a nuanced impact. One of the things we wanted to do is, since we work with several hundred publishers, we have a pretty robust database of information on print and digital subscriptions. And so we figured we'd pull a good cross-section of those and see what's happening over the last month, and also kind of year-over-year benchmarks as well. So what you'll see in the following slides is really data from the end of February through the end of March, roughly a 4-week time span for roughly 200 of our publishers. Just some aggregate metrics at a glance here. We were able to pull quickly about 200 digital publications and about 176 print publications. And we wanted to take a look and see what's happened over that last month in terms of just those high-level rate, volume, and revenue metrics. So overall, that increase in traffic has led to about a 3.4% increase in overall digital volume. So that's measured as volume today over volume 1 month ago. That's active circulation. Over that same time period, total print volumes are down just under 1%. So that's largely on trend with what we've seen over the previous year, but that is down just slightly. We were looking at benchmarks over the previous year. Total print volume last year on average was down about 14%. That 0.9 rate annualizes to just over 10%. So print volumes have stabilized somewhat as a product of the increased demand for news. Retention rates are actually quite similar over the previous month between print and digital subs, right around 96%, with just a very slight nod to print being just a little bit higher there. Average rate growth is actually quite modest. We've only seen, these are weekly rates of 1 penny growth on digital rates and about 4 cents on print rates. So one of the things we wanted to investigate was really how these, how the impact of the COVID pandemic is really impacting different types of publishers. And so we have a pretty equal distribution of publishers across the circulation sizes that you see on the x-axis of this graph. So we do have some publications, and these are for digital subscribers that have less than 500 digital subscribers, all the way up to more than 25,000, which is includes quite a few of the very large metro dailies at this point. One of the themes that we're seeing so far is that a lot of the growth rate that's coming from digital subscriptions is going disproportionately to large markets. So you can see here that even though the overall average was about 3 1/3% growth in overall digital subscribers, those with more than 25,000 before they entered March actually saw almost 6%, so almost double that mean, while those actually in the middle between 2,500 and 5,000 digital subscribers had the lowest growth rate of just over 1%. Interestingly, those that were smallest actually saw a fairly robust growth rate as well, just under 4%. These are just snapshots of weekly rates as of the end of March. And so, like I said, these are in weekly amounts. So roughly multiply that by 4 to get to a monthly number. Fairly equally distributed across the board. Once again, you kind of see a hollowed out middle section there in terms of circulation size. Those publishers that are the largest tend to have the highest weekly rates at about $2.62 a week. So just over $10 a month. While those, somewhere in the range of 5,000 all the way down to about 1,000 have the lowest weekly rates, usually far below $2. Just taking a quick look at retention, this is an interesting slide as well. There's quite a large difference here, even though these numbers look to be pretty close together. A 1 percentage point move or a 0.5 percentage point move in monthly retention actually extrapolates to quite a large difference in annualized retention or annualized churn. So similar trend here is those publishers that are quite large, greater than 25,000 digital subscribers today. We're seeing the highest month-over-month retention rates for those subscribers. The lowest are actually coming, it looks like, from the 1,000 to 2,500 group. Once again, those smaller publishers are doing quite well in terms of overall retention. Yeah, so this is yeah, go ahead, Dustin, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I'm going to walk through some similar examples here just briefly on the print side. You've been hearing some concerns about the impact of the pandemic on print circulation, and we wanted to just clear up and show what we're seeing. And a lot of it is really just amplifying trends that we've observed over the past year or so anyway. We're seeing accentuated a little bit over this time span, but a lot of the trends remain actually quite similar. So like Matthew just mentioned, some of these differences in circulation don't seem huge, but over the course of an extended time period, it can actually make a big difference. And we're continuing to see similar trends on the print side as well, where it seems to be really the smallest and the largest publishers tend to perform the best in over this time period anyway, where we're seeing about 0.4% decline on the print side for that smallest size publishers, and really that the largest publishers over 250,000 in print circulation experienced the smallest decline over that time. So it's really the mid-sized publishers where we're seeing the sharpest print declines at this point. So similarly on the weekly rate side, we see across all size publishers a range of between $6 and $7 per week right in that $25 to $30 a month threshold. And we are seeing that the larger publishers tend to have higher rates, but it's really that second largest group that has the highest rates currently. It's that 100,000 to 250,000 are right around that $7 per week, but all within a comfortable range of each other across the spectrum right now. Again, looking at print benchmarks on the retention side, so some similar trends to what we saw in the circulation changes, but on the retention side, we're seeing that some of the mid-sized publishers are actually doing quite a bit better, close to 97% retention over this time period, just the past month or so, where that 25 to 50K group there in teal in the middle really had the lowest retention, and they're the ones being hurt the most on the print side. But the smaller publishers in this case tend to be actually performing a bit better. So here on this slide, moving away from the print-only metrics and looking at some of the print to digital conversions, and that's something we're hearing more of recently. Is subscribers aren't necessarily stopping, but they are moving from print to digital. And this slide, one note is actually, if you look, it's comparing February 2020 to February 2019. So we're looking at trends over the past year now, not just the past month during the pandemic. And you can see that the investment that U.S. newspapers have made in digital subscriptions, we are really seeing that. We can see that digital subscriptions have grown significantly over the past year, with circulation up 52% on average over this roughly 200 publisher pool. And print decline with circulation have been about 14.5% over the past year. And you'll see that that 14.5% decline in circulation is being made up for somewhat by the increase in rate on the print side, about 14.3% increase in rate. And we are seeing, though, that the weekly revenue is not quite being made up for. You can see a 2% decline roughly on the print side, but a very large increase in weekly revenue on the digital side, over 62% on average across this cohort. So we're seeing that digital subscribers are taking up a growing share of print publications, moving from about 9% to close to a quarter of the total subscribers now. So yeah, we can move on to the next slide. So another thing we looked at was the cannibalization of digital subscriptions taking over from print. So we've seen that roughly 13% of current digital subscribers were print subscribers 1 year ago. And the challenge facing many publishers is that often that means a significant decline in rate. You can see on average, this represented a 55% rate loss. There are often higher margins on the digital side, just when you're eliminating the delivery costs, but that's a difficult pill to swallow for a lot of publishers. And an interesting thing is we found is there didn't seem to be really a correlation between the size of the difference between the print rate and the digital. So when there was a large difference in rate between the print price and the digital price, we found about the same amount of subscribers switching from print to digital as when there was a very small difference in price. So that may be an opportunity on the digital pricing side. Again, so looking at retention this is of new customers. So we're actually seeing now that new digital customers are not retaining quite as well as print customers, but the gap has really tightened over the past few years. In previous years, we found a huge discrepancy, especially over the first year, between new print customers compared to new digital customers being much more likely to stop. And at this point, we're actually seeing a much tighter band there. You can see after about a year, in the 30 to 40% range of new digital customers are staying on board. So really, we have just a couple more slides here just to wrap up. What we've shown is on the benchmarking side, digital subscription volumes have grown considerably over the last month, around 4% on average. And again, we found that the median and the averages were quite different. So we are seeing a a lot of variability there by publisher, but we've seen on the digital subscription side, really the largest publishers are benefiting the most on the growth in digital subscriptions. And really small publishers seem to be retaining subscribers quite well, though, the smallest group. And while we have seen some concerns about print volume declines, we've actually seen that be quite moderate. So the declines on print haven't really escalated as quickly as a lot of our clients expect, and we're actually seeing some increase in the switch from print to digital, but the declines on print volume haven't been as severe as many expected. So really, just speaking about 2020 and beyond, what considerations to take. We hope some of these benchmarks have been a helpful tool for gauging the impact of COVID-19 on subscription businesses and for comparing your own market's performance against the broader market. However, keep in mind these benchmarks can provide context to some of your own results, but your individual market considerations are still paramount when evaluating any changes to your business or evaluating pricing or retention programs. We are getting a lot of questions around pricing, and we do feel that publishers need to consider this very carefully. And many of the initial reactions we're seeing are that to lower subscription rates or pause pricing. But as Arvid kind of demonstrated, there is a lot of increased demand for engagement, and the demand for news may be increasing subscribers' willingness to pay. So make sure you're evaluating any pricing changes carefully. And lastly, on the retention side, with the increased engagement we're seeing for online news, identifying customers that are disengaging can be a really effective tactic to ensure that we can keep those customers and make sure to pay close attention to them, as well as customers that may have only signed up for the COVID-19 content. Make sure we're expanding the breadth of their engagement to ensure once this does die down, we're able to keep those customers on board. So yeah, Mather still hard at work. We have a team of economists and data scientists here in Atlanta, and we're happy to help any questions you have, and we're still we're fully capable to keep going despite this craziness. So we're happy to answer questions at this point.
Thank you, guys. We actually have a ton of questions, and so we can get to as many as possible. And what I'll do here, Matt, is in the event that we don't get to these questions, I'll send them to you with the people's emails, because I know who's asking these questions, and hopefully you can reach out to folks and answer them. But let's get as many answered, because it's kind of good for the good of the order. There are several questions that typed in. These are people that are on the line now participating, and so they're not in any particular order, so I'm just going to start rattling them off to you. The first one is, are the high-level subscription increases coming from sites that have most or all of their COVID-19 content behind the paywall?
Arvid, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's the trend. So we all name names, but one publisher, they did remove the paywall completely, and they had a lot of free content. They are at the low end of that benchmark of subscription growth. So I think yes, the higher end of that benchmark of growth is where people have put more content behind the paywall, save for that breaking news COVID.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that the best practice we're seeing, those customers of ours that have put most of that premium COVID content behind the meter are seeing about a 3 to 5x increase in digital subscriptions, which is remarkably close to the Super Bowl example Arvid showed earlier.
Next question. Has there been quantifiable data in any way that would report on increased reader trust on local media versus mainstream media?
It's a really great question. If you assume that loyalty engagement metrics are a proxy for that trust, and also people opening up their wallets as another proxy for that trust, I think I would argue yes. From a qualitative perspective, again, I'm not a journalist, and I don't know, but the data, to me, if I were to kind of use just the data we have, I'd say it's probably yes.
Good answer. This question is for Arvid. Did you say that subscription conversions are up by 71% or at 71% conversion rate? Which newspaper/publishers are these?
Sure. Yeah. So let me clarify. So that's 71, or I thought I said 72, but yeah, whichever number it is. Actually can't see right now, but that second line there, the conversions, that is all conversions via the website. So that includes people who hit the subscribe button, people who are, hitting the paywall and subscribing, people who are hitting a newsletter or an email marketing link, clicking, going to the website, subscribing. So that's the 2 or 3 primary channels. Yes, 71%. So, and that is a period over period. So it's a 71% growth for one 30-day snapshot versus the more recent 30-day snapshot. The conversion rate, the actual number, is usually around like 0.15% conversion rate, and that 0.15% has grown about 49%. That first bar on the left there, conversion rate.
Great, thank you. Regarding digital subscriber growth rate, small subscription and large subscription numbers are seeing higher growth rates than the middle of the subscriptions. Any idea why the curve is that way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't think we have a great answer for it, honestly, at this point. Some of the things that these benchmarks aren't controlling for is just other things that are happening with those types of markets. So it's sort of, outside the scope of pricing or acquisition, or the types of coverage. Sometimes those, especially on the smaller end of that subscription curve, a lot of those publishers are still in hyper growth mode, and they're very young in their digital subscription maturity. So whereas those kind of mid-sized publishers have really been pushing the envelope to try to get digital subscriptions in the door for several years, a lot of those that are in that 0 to 500 range are really just beginning that journey. And so that's probably just being accelerated from the COVID piece as well.
Okay, I've got a lot more questions coming in now also. Wow, okay. Regarding the types of content people are reading, how do you define non-coronavirus content? Are you including entertainment, sports, lifestyle, or just traditional news?
Yeah, it's a pretty basic definition. The definition here supersedes any like taxonomies that you would have. So it can be in entertainment, it can be in sports, it can be in business. Our criteria is we look for any instance of about, there's about 15 or 20 keywords, obviously coronavirus, COVID-19, pandemic, stuff like that. Most of those, the majority of the content is found by the first 3 or 4 of those. So basically any instance of that word in the title or in the URL, or if it's a new section, that's how it's currently defined. So it's kind of cross taxonomy.
Do you feel the price of digital versus print should be closer in rate? Also, how is the free but limited number of allowable stories an advantage, or should newspapers not have free content? And hold on, I think there's a second, not completely free, but read 10 before you need to subscribe.
I'll comment on the relative price question. We have found that as that difference in price gets larger and larger, that it accelerates the transition from print to digital. And so we've seen that in a number of places. And what we've done is calculate the profit from those subscribers. And in some cases, it has been essentially an unintentional consequence of keeping your digital prices really low, as you're in some ways just accelerating that transition. So we have had some what we call cross-price elasticity between print and digital products, and we do find that it's helpful to keep them within a relative range of each other, to have that not be an unintended consequence of cannibalizing your print volume.
To the kind of free content question, so I think at a high level, I mean, it's okay to have free content. I think it's just being very selective about if you're a premium, have a premium strategy where you have, it's all, this article is either free or premium. or subscriber only, as some people call it. For a metered strategy, if you have 5 articles, 10 articles, 1 article, I think it's okay to have that kind of strategy as long as you're very deliberate about what why you're making that decision. So I think historically it's been about balancing ad revenue and subscription revenue. So we've the optimal setting was perhaps a little bit higher years ago in terms of how much free content you allow. I think more recently, and especially today, that level is probably going to go a lot more restrictive. So I'd imagine that this year the percent of premium content is going to go up, and the with free going down, and the meter rules are also going to get much more restrictive. And I think what's perhaps kind of is registration walls are great. They're used heavily in Europe and in some many places in South America. The U.S. for some reason hasn't adopted them as aggressively. New York Times, I think, did that last month. So I'd suggest the reg wall is a great tactic for kind of this intermediary step to maybe access 4 or 5 more articles.
I'll just add one more point, that the price elasticity for digital subscribers is actually not, it's comparable to print. We've done a lot of tests where we found that for the digital subscribers that have been active and engaged for a year or 2 or 3, that you can usually raise their rates similarly to how you raise as print. So, and we do a lot of A/B testing to verify that. So we're managing digital price increases for a number of publishers now that have had digital subscribers for some time.
Next question, on the print decline trend slide, what was that compared to, last month or last year?
Yeah, that was actually compared to last year. We don't have month-over-month benchmarks from January to February, although we do plan on doing that soon. That 0.89% decline month-over-month in print, we are comparing to last year's, which, like I mentioned, was about overall circulation on print for our benchmarks was off about 14.5% overall. That 0.89% would trend out to just around 10%. So a slight decline in the attrition levels on print is what we've observed really over the last month.
And I'll add just some color to that. We've had conversations recently with a number of publishers, and what we've really found in the past couple of weeks is that print stops are down and print starts are up. We actually have had, it's not the majority, but we are seeing some publishers that actually have increasing print circulation in the past couple of weeks.
For a print publication in the under 5,000 category, what is the benchmark percentage for the number of online subscribers its website should have?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that on the spot without some more benchmark data, but I can follow up directly with that question if needed.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, I was just going to say overall, I mean, I think we've noticed about 25% of a mature print publication is usually the size of the digital publication base, 25 to 30%. So that's probably a good relative benchmark.
If we see that our subscription rate is lower than the averages on your slides, can you talk generally about how a paper can catch up? How often have you seen papers raise, how often have you seen papers raise rates? Once a year, once every 6 months?
So really, we've traditionally found that they raise them. Historically, they've had annual increases, but we are working with many publishers now that are having increases every nine months, sometimes as frequently as every 6 months. I think that each, to that person, I'd be happy to have a chat with them about their specific market. There are some really market-specific factors that you need to consider in terms of how to catch up, bring your average rate up to the benchmark.
Okay. I'm the managing editor of 2 small weeklies in Wyoming, each paper around 1,000 in circulation. We are currently offering e-edition on annual rate. Have you found papers having more success with monthly billing?
A tactic that we've found recently working really well is, to Arvid's point about giving less content away for free and really having a tighter meter, is that you're going to have a lot more sales attempts on those customers. And what will happen traditionally is that your conversion rate will decline because those people that are hitting the meter are not as engaged as they would have been if they had had 3 or 4 or 5 or more articles. What we do recommend, or what we are seeing people do to counteract that effect, is to have a lower price but a longer term. So for instance, you might have 99 cents for, it used to be people do 99 cents for the first week or month. Now we're seeing people do 99 cents, but maybe for the first year or the first 6 months. And what that does is it offsets both the decline in conversion rate, but it also improves the retention rate quite a bit. So the short answer is, I think annual is good for e-papers for new subscribers.
Okay, let's see. Okay. The question was, on average, what is the digital-only subscription percentage to total circulation? But they rephrased the question and sent in rephrase of total circulation. What are you finding to be the percentage of digital-only subscribers?
Yeah, I think that benchmark that I just mentioned a few minutes ago is the answer to that question. So roughly 25 to 30% on average is what we're seeing. Larger publishers, are higher on that range on average. Smaller publishers tend to be a little bit lower.
So I'm going to jump over to some of the questions that were sent in advance. Here's one. How much should we focus on engagement versus conversion during the crisis?
Arvid, you want to go first?
I'm sorry, audio was a bit breaking up there. The conversion rates, I'm sorry.
It was, how much should we focus on engagement versus conversion during the crisis?
Yeah, I think the conversion, I think, will happen naturally if you are, you follow kind of the best practices and the business rules. So I think if you are, again, metering breaking news COVID content, if you're still putting, firing the paywall on, kind of the local news, the in-depth coverage, I think the conversions right now are kind of taking care of themselves in some way. I think right now you have an opportunity to kind of focus on the top and mid-funnel engagement, because you have an influx of a lot of new users on your website, perhaps are only coming there because of COVID. So I think right now perhaps there's an opportunity to invest in kind of those top and mid-funnel tactics, so the engagement tactics. And again, that assumes you have the right business rules already set for your paywall, and you're not kind of letting everyone read everything for free.
We might have just one more, possibly 2 more questions. Generally speaking, what are your thoughts on best practice on the price difference between digital only and print?
Well, I think that what we found is that very similar to print subscribers, that once you've had a digital subscriber for a year, we found that there's a reduction in price sensitivity once somebody's been active for a year, and then again around 2 or 3 years. So longer term digital subscribers you do have some pricing power with those people. They're very engaged with the content. They like the product. So I am an advocate of having, I would say, longer term acquisition offers for digital subscribers, but then as you get them past that 1 year anniversary or 2, then don't be necessarily too afraid to raise their price. Most of the and just on that topic, in terms of one of the recommendations we have is during this crisis, what we're finding is that most of the calls our clients are receiving are not around price changes. They're really around quality of service. And we realize that a lot of you have call centers that are challenged because people can't get there, both domestically and overseas. So what we would recommend is communication with your clients. So be pretty transparent. I think we've had people we're aware of people that have put notifications in the paper itself saying, please don't call us, please go to our website or our text, service options, and just be very straightforward. Say, listen, we're having some, as everybody is, we've got a lot of disruption going on, but just let everybody know what's going on with your company.
Okay, I'm going to throw this last one out. I'm not necessarily, I don't know that you can answer it, but I think it's an interesting question. What will be one or more of the structural changes that occur in subscriptions, membership, members' behavior as a result of COVID-19? That is, what won't just, quote, go back to normal when it comes to audiences deciding whether or not to subscribe? And how does this change the value proposition publishers should be promoting? I guess if you guys can answer that.
I'll give my 2 cents. I'll let these guys pipe in. But we work with a lot of publishers around the world, and in Europe in particular, their revenue model has historically been much more skewed towards subscriptions. They're 80% or more of their revenue comes from their audience, and what they're actually seeing very similar advertising reductions percentage-wise, but because the advertising revenue is such a smaller percentage of their revenue that it's not as big an effect. So I think what will happen is that the newspaper model in the United States is going to continue to accelerate towards a subscriber revenue model, which typically means you want to have a higher quality product that people pay more for. So that's my hypothesis.
Anyone else? Okay, well, we're just a few minutes past the hour, and I thought that was just excellent, guys. I'm getting a lot of thank yous here to you, and I'll add my thank you to that. Great job, lots of questions. If there are, Matt, I hope that this is okay. If there are people that had questions, and we had a lot of questions, and I had to kind of sort them pretty quickly, can I ask them to go ahead and reach out to you directly, Matt, and your team to answer questions if they had something that didn't get taken care of?
Indeed, absolutely. And our emails are all first name at mathereconomics.com. So you had Arvid, Matthew, Dustin, and myself. So feel free to email all of us or any of us in particular. Right.
And if for some reason you don't have that, email me and I'll certainly forward them on. Again, I want to remind you that you will all probably by tomorrow, you will get a link to the recording of the webinar today. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint. You will get the takeaways that Mark will write up, and go to our website at newspapers.org for all this information. We have, this is probably the 5th in a series of webinars we've done in less than 2 weeks. All of them are available online. They're all free, the materials and everything. So we keep trying to post as much information that can help all of you as possible. If there's something particular that you think would be helpful to you, please send that information to me. Again, Matt, Matthew, Dustin, and Arvid. I sure appreciate all your time, guys, and your expertise. It was super helpful. I'm getting so many thank yous here from people. So really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Good luck, everybody. Take care, be safe, and be well.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much, Patty.
Thanks.
Take care.